So I'm gonna make
Yeah,
okay, we're recording now. Okay. Hey guys, this is take two of my show with Jerry Wills. We're gonna be talking today about his Canadian origins from Ceti and how we went for Stargate and his healing abilities and a little bit more about the rest. Jerry Wills is an international marine tour with lifelong interpretable abilities, recognizing cloud attention and manipulating life force energy. His journey includes a near-death experience, decades of documented films, and global recognition after a patient wrote during his intervention. And today we'll get into all that. Yeah, with all that said, let's give him a big warm welcome back to the show. Gary, thanks so much for coming on. How are you?
I'm doing great. Sorry about the incident with the audio, but happily, I think we have it fixed, so we'll be able to continue with the show. It's not messing up now, apparently.
Yeah,
So, but thank you for inviting me on. It is a privilege to be here with you, Robert.
yeah. So tell us a little bit about yourself. You started to before we started. You were saying about how you were seeing UFOs basically your whole life.
Yeah, that's pretty much it. I mean, back, imagine you're from Pennsylvania, so you know what it's like. You get out of the cities, get out into the countryside, and it's a little bit different life. Well, in many ways, it's a lot different life. And where I grew up, I was a pretty good distance from the nearest town. Didn't go to town very often. Worked on the farm, basically. And at about 12 and a half years old, I saw something remarkable just floating over the tops of the trees. It was ginormous, just huge. Had a it's just like a chrome hubcap, that kind of shiny. Except this thing must have been, I don't know. I really don't know how big it was, but let's say it was 100 feet long. It might have been bigger. It had these pastel colored lights that were circular that went from one end to the other. Size, or about a third the size of the ship. I'll call it a ship. So at arm's length, if you were to hold a silver dollar between your fingers, it'd be about, that big at that distance, and the distance was roughly maybe 1,500 feet away. And as far as length goes, well, I don't know. It was quite long. Um, at that distance, probably this long and about that thick. It looked like a dirigible. That's the only thing I had in my mind that I'd seen in the encyclopedias and other books I'd read that would match it, except it wasn't a dirigible. It was obviously metallic. The full moon was glinting off of it. This was right at sunset. So anyway, it just remained there for a bit, and I thought, well, I'll just run over there and see what this is. So it was cold, but hell, you ran everywhere on the farm anyway. So I took a few steps to do it, and there was a voice in my head that said, no, don't come over here. And that's all. So I didn't. I was really kind of surprised. It's like I heard it in my ears, but there wasn't a sound out here. It was all inside my head. So I didn't. And I sat there and I watched for the longest time. And finally, it's got darker and darker. Those pastel-colored circles of light. They got a little bit brighter, but not very much. And finally, it just drifted off and went out of sight, over the horizon. We lived on top of a hill, so the horizon was very shallow, and it was out of sight before 2 or 3 minutes, really. The thing that convinced me it wasn't a dirigible is because there was a pretty stiff breeze blowing from my left, and when this thing stopped, you could see the tops of the pine trees, cedar trees, whatever they were. They were kind of moving like this, with the wind. And this thing just stood dead on. And when it went against the wind very slowly and then just vanished from view. It would be another, well, let's see, that was I think it was like November. So the next summer, I was down in the woods waiting for a friend of mine to show up. And instead, and this is far down into the woods, we were going to go look for an old Civil War graveyard that was rumored to be down in a place called Spook Hollow. So we were going to run that course and see if we could find this place. And there really wasn't any maps or anyone really knew. It was just kind of a local legend. So I got as far as I could go. I'm waiting for my friend Randy to show up. But Randy never showed up. I didn't know at that time he wasn't going to. I just sat down under a tree on some moss and just leaned against a tree waiting. It was hot, steamy. You know how it is where you are in the middle of the summer, you get into the woods, just hot, you're sweating and steamy. Well, it was like that. It had, a shirt on with no sleeves, unbuttoned, had on my long pants, and no, I think they were short pants, cutoffs. And then I had some hiking boots on. Well, anyway, before long, and I was trying to cool off, it was hot. Before long, there was this fellow. Well, I heard footsteps through the, crunching through the leaves and twigs and whatever. And I thought it was Randy, so I just sat there and acted like I was asleep. Well, it's got closer and closer and stopped, and I figured it's Randy, so I opened my eyes, and hell, there's this man standing there. And he's got on this outfit that's right down to his wrist, right up against his neck. I mean, just a full body outfit. At the time, no one ever heard of a Lycra suit. But that's what I would say now, reflecting back, that's what it looked like. It was kind of a beige color, a little darker, maybe a little, toward the tan, I guess. And he had a belt. And the pants, of course, I could see his feet, and where his feet would be, these pants didn't have an ending, they just went right into being boots or shoes of some sort. And there he stands. And he says, "Hi, Jerry. Mind if we visit for a few minutes?" Well, I wasn't afraid of anybody, and there wasn't ever any reason to be concerned about such a thing. I said, "Sure, have a seat, let's talk." And he wanted to know all about me and where I lived and about school and, different things like this. But as we were talking, it became suddenly apparent that I wasn't hearing him with my ears. I was hearing him in my head, just as clear as if we were talking. And he could hear me, because I had stopped talking too. Well, I felt a little lightheaded. I remember I felt sort of lightheaded and just slightly disoriented, but not bad. Anyway, I asked him where he's from. He told me he just pointed up. He says, "I'm from up there." And I said, "Up there where?" He said, "The stars. I'm from another world." He introduced me to his name. His name was Zoe. I figure it's Z-O. He never spelled it for me. And that, he just wanted to visit and just say hi. No harm done. And so I said, "So you're in a flying saucer?" And he said, "Well, something like that." I said, "Where is it?" And he pointed kind of behind, behind me. He says, right down over there in a clearing. Well, I want to see it. And he says, no, not right now. There'll be another time if you'd like to visit again. I'm sure there'll be another time, and perhaps I can show you more. Because I just wanted to make sure that it was okay with you. I said, yeah, it's fine, but I want to see it. And he says, no. He said he had to leave, and that I should just stay there, and he'd let me know the next time we could get together. And I said, well, how are you going to let me know? And then, very peculiarly, there was this sound. It wasn't loud, but it wasn't quiet. It was just present. And it was the sound like Morse code, except it was very fast. Just, beeping noises is what I called them. I didn't know Morse code from anything at the time. I was 13 at that point. And so, I said, okay. He said, well, when you hear that, then come outside and you'll find us. All right. So he left, and I just sat there just like I was just in a daze. And I heard him crunching off in the distance, and then very shortly after there was this humming, I don't know how you'd explain, humming, buzzy sound. It wasn't loud, and then it was gone. And so I figured, well, he told me Randy wasn't coming, so I figured I'd just go back home. It was a pretty good hike to get back home. So I went back home, and it would be a couple months, and then I would hear this beeping noise. And the first time I heard it, I thought, huh. Well, we lived in a house that had no running water, and we had the outhouse a distance away from the house. So it wasn't unusual for someone to get up in the night, go out to the outhouse. Not that it ever happened all that much, but... So I heard the beeping noises, and I lay there for a while thinking, and they started up again, and thinking more about it. So I get up, and I go out the back door, and if I turn one way or another, the beeping noises will either get stronger or weaker. So I just followed it, went way back into one of the back fields. There was a ridge of trees, and I went past those and turned to the right. And then there was another long field. And there at the end of that field, I could see something. It was dark, but I could see something there, light. Not much light. So I just walked off that direction, and sure enough, there he was. And there was this UFO, this flying saucer. And we talked. And that was really the inception of about a 5-year journey of visitations with this guy named Zoe, and sometimes he brought others with him and talked to them too. And it was always started out with just conversation, and it ended up being telepathic. Very clear. And so, that's how it all kind of started in that respect. When I turned 18, he told me that actually 17 and a half, they told me that they had taught me everything that they wanted to teach me, because they were teaching me this whole time.
Wow, it's amazing. Yeah, and and then how did your near-death experience tie into it? Did you think your near-death experience opened you up to abilities? Did you always have abilities?
No, I always had them. My life wasn't just about UFOs. At the time I didn't know. I thought everybody had something like this going on, but no, I could see dead people. I could hear them talking, if they were there or not. Usually if they were there, it was a lot more pleasant because it's kind of creepy hearing someone talking and there's nobody there. I hate that shit.
Yeah.
But no, it was that. I'd go to my grandma's house, and I'd pick up a picture, look at it. It's weird, but it was like it would become animated, and I would know about the person. I'd know all about the person, um, and I could touch things. Like she had some really old, you know, really antique items from the 1800s, and I would hold it, and then I would hear the story. I don't know how I can say I heard the story, because it wasn't something I saw, but it's something I just immediately knew. How this came to be, what its story was. Whether it's a hair clip or a brush or a coin or some other artifact from her childhood. She was quite old. And then, of course, there was precognition. I knew things before they would ever happen. And then there was the healing. And, I didn't really think about any of this as being unusual. I thought everyone could do it. I could see colors around people, around plants, animals, things. Now they call it the aura. I didn't have a word for it back then. And later, what happened was there was an animal on the farm, a cow, and it was favoring its right hind leg. And apparently, cows push each other around, and it hurt its hip. We didn't have many cows; they were all milk cows. Well, and they were used to being touched. So I just walked up to it, ran my hand along its back, put my hand on its hip, and closed my eyes. Well, hell, I could see all kinds of stuff in there. I didn't know what it was, but I could recognize there's bone, here's blood. This looks like muscle. I didn't have really much of a vocabulary for these things, didn't have much of any knowledge about it. And I'd see there's something wrong. So it would stand out, like a red dot on a white sheet of paper. So I just go in and just think, well, this shouldn't be like this, and I just make it go away. And sure enough, the cow turned and looked at me and walked off and wasn't limping anymore. So I did that for the cows, the dogs. We didn't have any cats. Strangely enough, one time, it was like 4:30 in the morning. You get up early to go milk the cows. And my job was to get the feed for the cows. So I had these buckets, and there were 50-gallon drums inside of this shed. Well, I'd go in there and get some of this grain, some of that grain. There was oats in there, I remember that. There was some corn in this one. Anyway, I'd mix it all together in these buckets, and that would be for the cows. I'd take it back and put it in the trough, and the cows would eat it while my stepdad was milking. Well, this one morning, it's just cold. And there was, I noticed as soon as I walked in, there was a mouse trap, and there was this mouse. And this mouse trap had just right, behind its ears. And it just like splayed out, just not moving. And that just made me feel awful. So I picked up the mouse trap, its little tail's dangling, and I pried open this stupid mouse trap and dumped the mouse into my hands. A little bit of blood on its nose. And it was a female, obviously. And I thought it's so cold. So I put my hands over it. I started blowing into it to warm it up. And my hands started getting hotter and hotter. And that's something typical now when I'm working on someone. They just get hot anyway. But wasn't, in my lexicon of knowing things at the time. And I'm just, blowing air, just, trying to make it warm so they'll come back to life. Well, after, I don't know, might have been a minute, maybe 2 minutes, I got a little dizzy, blowing. And so I'm standing there with my hands over just to keep it warm. There's little scratchy feelings on my palm. And I pulled my hand back, and here's this mouse. And it's just sitting there looking at me with a little bit of blood on its nose. And whiskers, shivering. And I said, wow, well, I think you're going to be just fine, but you have to avoid the mouse traps. So I told it that in the future I would take and always make sure that it had food, and I'd drop it down the crack. And I showed it where I was going to drop it and said, this is where you can go. You don't have to come up here, and And I found all the mouse traps, and I threw them down over the hill, down in a holler. Well, the mouse was dead. At least I think it was dead. It had been there. It's just absolutely cold to the touch. Now it was warm. And I don't know. I mean, did it come back to life? Was it almost dead and I helped it to not die? I have no idea. But that was a profound thing to me. So then I started thinking, I could do this to help people. The gal over the hill, she had breast cancer, and this person over here has arthritis, and I started thinking about the different people. And I dare not talk to my mother or stepdad about this. That just wouldn't work. They didn't want to hear such things. And people back in the hills, they have their own mythology. They're very superstitious people. So I was warned not to discuss UFOs or any of these things I could do. Hell, one time a quarter was thrown out into the tall grass out in the field by one of the kids that I knew. He said, yeah, well, if you're so psychic, go find this quarter. And it was my quarter. And so he just tossed it out there in the grass, and it's like, I turned to see where he threw it, and I couldn't even, it was just gone. Well, that really sucks. I mean, getting a quarter doesn't sound like much now, but back then, it was a deal. So I was angry about it, and I just found myself walking, crossing over the barbed wire fence, walking out into the field, and I walked right up, reached right down, put my hand under the grass, shuffled my hand back and forth, pulled a quarter out, and showed it to him, and I said, don't do it again. Put it in my pocket. Well, they never messed with me after that. But I was warned not to be obvious in public with this. But one morning, after it rained all night, a local farmer brought the tractor back to us as one of those small Ford Cub tractors. And he's an older fellow, which is funny to say now because, hell, I'm an older fellow. But he's an older guy, and he's climbing off the back of that tractor. It had mud all over the place. He slipped, almost fell, and he hurt his knee. Well, back in that area, they don't curse. They say weird little phrases. And he was going, "Oh, Swanee, oh, Swanee, I've hurt my knee. Oh, Swanee, I've hurt my knee." And so I was right there, so I helped him walk over. We had these, you might have seen it in Pennsylvania, where you just cut down a tree and it's like, 2 feet across or so. Yeah. And cut it off at about 24 inches, and now you've got a place to set. And we had a few of those on the side yard there, right next to where he was just right there at the tractor. So he came over and sat down there. He's got these old rubber galoshes on, baggy clothes, hat, and he's hurting. Well, I didn't like the idea that he was hurting, so I said, "Here, let me see it for a second." I put my hand on there before I could say anything, and just like I did with the cowl, I just took a look inside and I saw what the problem was. Well, now I know that he had torn his meniscus, but I didn't know anything about that stuff. I just saw there's a problem. So I just, in my mind, just figured out this has got to be, what it's supposed to be. Not like this. And after I finished, it didn't take not even a minute. He said it stopped hurting. I said, "Well, try to walk on it." And he did, and he looked at me and he says, "Boy, what did you do?" And I said, "Oh, I made it better." He says, "There's something not right with you, boy. There's something not right with you at all." He's scowling at me. And so here he is, walking out across the fields, the muddy fields. He had a bit of a walk to get back to his house. Well, that got around the community. They weren't very pleasant about it. It's the same old thing. Coconut telegraph. People tell the story over and over, and pretty soon it gets bigger than the original story. So the preacher figured that I needed to be saved. I wasn't sure what I was going to be saved from, but he figured I needed to be saved, I needed to be baptized, and I need to go to church, and da-da-da-da-da. Baptists. So I went down and, saw what it was all about. I didn't know anything about religion. And after I found out what it was all about, I really wasn't too inclined. So he decided, well, maybe he just needs to bond with me. So he decided it was time for he and I to go hunting for squirrels. Well, the squirrels were my friends. I would sit down there in the woods and I'd take corn down there to them, and I just thought they were neat, just such neat beings, and they trusted me. They were getting to where they trusted me quite well. And now here's this fool, he's wanting me to go down there and shoot him. Well, he gave me a 22 rifle, and he had a shotgun, a 410. And he's telling me all about, God and religion, and I told him I don't want to kill animals. And he's like, well, no, God put them here for us to use. And I thought, that doesn't seem right to me. Well, we're sitting there. He picked a pretty good spot for the squirrels, I have to say. Right there at the old oak tree. Lots of acorns. And so you could hear the squirrels. They were jumping around, dropping acorns on the forest floor. You could tell they were up there. And he said, "You see, there's one right there." So, he says, "Now you just line it up," and he's giving me all the instructions, and gently pull the trigger. And we'll have that for dinner tonight. Well, that was just like a horror show for me. I didn't like that idea, not even a little. So, I shot way off the mark, and I kept shooting over and over and over again, just over here, over there, nowhere where the squirrels were, probably close, but I wasn't going to hit them. Well, all the squirrels just left. Oh, he was pissed. And so he took me back home, told my stepdad, who promptly gave me a beating for doing that. And I figured at this point, it's better if I don't talk about this stuff, and so I didn't.
That was so interesting. Yeah, this is fascinating. Where was I going to go with that? Um, yeah, like And then how did you end up at the Tiwanaku Stargate? Like, and what happened with that? Like the portal.
Well, the Stargate, the portal, that's in southern Peru. Um, it's not too far from Tiwanaku. That's probably another hour and a half drive south. You can't go very fast on those roads. But yeah, I had been doing starting some trips to Peru. I mean, that's a whole story in itself. But started doing trips to Peru, and one area I'd not gone to was southern Peru, and I'd heard it was, I wanted to see Lake Titicaca, like a lot of people would. Ended up at a hotel called the Taipikaila, and the gal who was in charge, her name was Edith. She was in charge of land and accommodations, so she introduced me to this guy. I think his name was Jorge. Um, anyway, that doesn't matter. But telling me some stories about, all the stuff there in southern Peru and the things that were just amazing. And so he said, well, if you go down this road, and he gave the instructions, and he said, I'll have my driver take you. So the next day, I went down there, and we stopped like in the middle of nowhere. There's like some outcroppings, not really mountains, but they were quite tall. And the guide walked me over there, and here comes Jorge, if that was his name. And he's shown up, so he's taking me over there to show me this magnificent portal that no one knows what it means. He says outside of here, nobody even knows it exists. So he showed me the whole area and told me about it. It's like, that's pretty cool. And he says, yeah, it's a portal. He says, you have to be careful around this thing, because the locals, they're Aymara natives, and the locals are afraid of it, because people have disappeared. They'd just be sitting there in front of it, men or children. They don't let the children play around it anymore. People just suddenly they just vanish right in front of other people. They just vanish. Well, that sounds like quite a story. And I never forgot it. It sounded like the kind of thing that would pique my interest. But I examined it pretty thoroughly, and I didn't notice anything peculiar about it, except it was just a hell of a neat-looking thing out in the middle of nowhere. A few years later, I don't know how many, 4 or 5 years later, another long story, but I ended up meeting this man. His name was Pedro. Old fellow. Had a little fedora, tan fedora, total wrinkledy face, sunburnt, aged face. And without going into all the details, he and I became friends. Well, I didn't know who he was, just this old guy from Lake Titicaca, so I asked him about this place. Have you ever heard of this place? He said, oh, I know this place. So we start talking, and he says, basically, I'll tell you how to make it work, but you have to be careful. It's very dangerous. He says, I don't know how to use it. I've never tried this, but I've seen people going in and out of it, and they do this, so it must have something to do with how the gate operates. So, all right. Fast forward a little bit further in time, a couple years more. Kathy and I have been married. We got married in September, and here it is, November. So it's not long after we were married. We were down there with a group of people, still doing the trips to Peru. And I just had this inclination. Everybody talks about 1111 showing up everywhere. I never paid much attention to it, but it did seem a little odd. So I figured I'm going to go to this doorway on November 11th at 11 p.m. All these 11s. And I'm going to try what Pedro said. You know, at the surface, this sounds anywhere from foolish to ludicrous. That's because there's a lot more to this story that I'm telling you. A lot more. But Kathy's with me, and so are some other people. We go out there at 11 o'clock at night. I'm right there with these folks. It's like, Kathy wants to know, are you going to do this, really? Well, what if it actually works? I said, I don't think it's going to work. I just think it's just a lot of noise, really. But you don't know until you try. So I positioned myself up there, did exactly what Pedro said to do. I made the tones, which I did over and over and over again because I never could get them quite exactly right. It's not easy to do in the rarefied atmosphere at 13,000 feet. You know, a deep voice like mine, it raises an octave almost. So I'm trying to make these low tones and high tones. And, well, Kathy's sitting behind me off to my right. So are a couple of the other passengers are sitting there. And it's cold as hell. I mean, it's just so cold. I've got this big white London fog, down-filled waist jacket on. And it's still cold. But I'm up there doing this. And the next thing you know, I'm not there. I'm moving through... It sounds absurd, but it was like I was in a bubble moving through the cosmos at a ridiculously fast speed. Things were whizzing by. Well, Kathy and our passengers, Kathy saw that it looked like I just shimmered, like on Star Trek.
Yeah.
She said, that's how she describes it. I didn't see it. But she said, shimmered just like on Star Trek, and I just wasn't there. Right in front of her eyes and these other people. Well, for me, I'm just zooming through space. Finally, I go through what feels like a point of resistance. And I find myself just, in this room, cavernous. There was no echo. It was very dead sonically. It was all white. You couldn't tell the ceiling from the floors. It was just ridiculous. And I'll just, give a thumbnail sketch of what happened here because it's another long story, but essentially there was a voice. And it sounded like when you were in high school, it comes over the loudspeaker, like an intercom voice. And it speaks perfect English. It wants to know who I am and what am I doing there, how did I get there, pertinent questions. So I explained the situation. And so we had a conversation. And we just kept talking and talking. It was fascinating. There came a point when I suddenly realized that I don't know how long I've been here. I don't even know how long it took to get here. And Kathy, she's sitting back there on that cold-ass chunk of rock. And what did she see? Is she all right? Well, what if I don't get back? Did she leave? Am I going to be stuck out here, All these thoughts came through my mind. And I told him about it. It was a male voice. And so he agreed he'd help me to go back. And he did. And the next thing you know, I'm zooming through the cosmos so fast it's ridiculous. Seeing things, stars and galaxies. I don't know what it was. I've seen all kinds of stuff. And then I'm inside this antechamber. I'm facing outward, looking out the door, but I cannot go through it. It's like it's made of something completely transparent, but I cannot get through it. And that just freaked the hell out of me. So I found the little notch like on the other side, put my forehead in it, put my hands up against it, and I just worked at making those tones again. Well, you can imagine you're hyperventilating. And I wasn't very successful at it at first. When I finally got my composure, I finally must have hit the right tone combination. And suddenly I'm on the other side of it. And of course Kathy's sitting there with tears in her eyes. And then suddenly I back in again, like Star Trek. Well, the one gal that was with us was so freaked out. She was in therapy for years. And Kathy's like, "You're back." I'm like, "Yeah, you disappeared." I said, "Yeah, I know." "What happened?" "I'll tell you about it when we get back to the room. I just want to get the hell out of here." So I told her all about it when I got back. I don't know what to make heads or tails of that. There have been plenty of people that wanted me to give them the tones. And I'm sure there are those out there that don't even believe it's real. I don't care one way or the other if they believe it or not. It doesn't change it. Pedro told me not to give out the tones until after his death. Well, he's gone. And the reason I don't do the tones, provide them, hell, I don't know how you steer this thing. I mean, where would you end up? Where I ended up, maybe I was just lucky. Where do those kids end up? Where do the men end up? Who are the people going in or coming out of it and going back into it, dressed in complete, Inca regalia? And I mean, I have no idea how this thing works. I don't know where it goes. I call it a Stargate because that's the closest approximation I can make. The TV show Stargate. This is kind of like that without, the big wheel turning and all that jazz. So I don't know how it works. And because I don't know how it works, I figured if I give somebody the tones, they go in there, they're lost forever. Well, it's on me because I handed them the details that took them away.
Yeah, wow, you got a fascinating life, Jerry. You really have. Like this, you had some really interesting experiences. Like when you went to that other dimension, who do you think that God was? Do you think that the God that was speaking to you? Do you think it was like some like someone from, I guess, obviously like some being from another dimension, right? Did you ever get any clarification on who that was or anything?
No, he just told me that they were very interested in their own origins. They had discovered that the universe, and I'm paraphrasing for simplicity, that the universe existed in layers. And when they discovered that they are in a layer, they wanted to know what was above and what was under. So they couldn't figure out how to do it, so they figured if they created a test universe that they could perhaps get some idea. Well, they did. It reminds me a lot of what I've heard about CERN. Back when this happened, of course, there's no word about CERN. That wasn't a thing. But, these years since then, it kind of reminds me of the work they were doing at CERN. Well, anyhow, they created this thing, and then it wouldn't go away. Instead, it started out small and just kept growing, and by the time it got to where it was at, when I saw it, it was this very large, it's a large gelatinous mass just hanging in the air. There were these rods. I don't know what the rods were made of. They had like red marbles moving through them. Otherwise, the rods were just kind of a pale whitish glow. They were illuminated, of course, but they were just in this haphazard configuration. Didn't make any sense to me at all. I mean, part of me was expecting, sacred geometry, because I knew about that. There was no sacred geometry in any of this. It was just haphazard. And they said that it had grown to its size, and so they had gone inside to find out what's in there. And in doing that, they had created these doorways, and that these doorways were all interconnected, and they'd been all through our universe, which, when you think about it, that sounds pretty far-fetched, but, I mean, if they're saying they did, who am I to question it? But they had left doorways all over the place. And that's how they would go from one point to another instantaneously on these other worlds. There were several on each world, just like there are several on this world. And so, when we got back, Kathy and I were pretty keen on figuring out where the other doorways were. And we came up with, 2 or 3 points that were good candidates, but we've never been to any of them. One of them's in Ecuador, up high on a mountain. Oh, that was the other thing. He said that these doorways were made so that they weren't accessible very easily by anyone who might be there. Well, this one's way the hell up on a mountain in Ecuador, a mountain in the Andes. And it's another big doorway just carved right into the damn side of the mountain. And the locals, we did hear from a fellow in Ecuador. He spoke good English, but he was Ecuadorian. And he said that they teach the local people living up in the mountains, and that they'd come down with these fantastic stories, and they were very afraid because the light came out of the doorway and people came through it. Tall people, well, 6 foot or greater, I'm sure, because these people are like, 4 foot tall. And then they show up and go back through the doorway again. And they had seen this happen many times, and they were really afraid. So they told this guy who was running the school, he and his mother ran the school, to teach them. And because of that, he decided, he had seen, what we had been putting out there. Maybe he read this story, because the story's been out there for a while. And he contacted me and said, would you like to come to Ecuador? Well, sure I would, but we never did go. I regret that now. I'd love to have gone. The doorway is still there, up on the side of a mountain. God only knows what's been going on since.
Wow, this is fascinating. Yeah, I could ask you, and I'm going to have you back for part 2 because this is really fascinating. But do you think that this is like tied to like the missing 411? And do you think these doorways are more abundant throughout our world than we think? Do you think they might be other places? Like how the missing 411 is like a national court and stuff like that. Do you think that like this could be an explanation for that in some sense, or maybe these doors are more in more places than we can imagine, or something like that?
I don't know if the doorways specifically are that. However, there are places that we know about where there are no doorways that people can wander into and they vanish. There's one back east someplace, I've forgotten the location now. The family could hear this guy screaming for help, yelling for help, except there's no one there. It's just an empty field. He just walked out there and just vanished in front of everyone. So we know that there are places like this, and what I believe is happening, I think the doorways were placed in locations where the energy of the earth would accommodate such an action. And the doorways are kind of like, just improvements on how that action would occur. But there are places you don't need the doorway, they just walk in and disappear. There's a place near us in Arivaca. There was once this archway. It was tall enough for a normal-sized man to walk through. Just made of natural materials. It's on a plateau, and the plateau is basically just quartz crystal. Well, the archway's gone now. It collapsed a couple decades ago. However, there are still people who've gone to this place, and strange things happen. One man's disappeared, for sure. Kathy and I have been there a few times. I can tell you it's a very strange place. But there are places like this, and I think in relation to 411, if you take a look at where these people are missing, look, for you and for your listeners, take a look at the North American Craton, Kraton. All right, lay down where the North American Craton is, or trace it on a map, and then do an overlay of where the missing people are. Now, the Craton is like the immovable object. You think of it metaphorically that way. Around the Craton, the plates are moving and shifting. That would be called the unstoppable force. Well, you've got these two actions and pressures building and building. So that's going to release energy from the earth into the air, into the earth. That's predictable. Everybody knows that happens. But the part everyone's leaving out, and the part that no one has looked into, where 411 is specifically the issue, is that what did the sun do just prior to the person vanishing? Because if solar radiation, we're not talking sunlight or heat, we're talking energy from the sun. It's always fluctuating. Sometimes it's greater than others. But if this happened to be at one of those times where it's greater than others and it goes to the earth is like a very large capacitor. It stores energy, and then when it gets to a point of saturation, it releases it. Releases it out into the sky, really. The ionosphere is the toppermost part of the capacitor. The earth is like the ground of the capacitor down into the earth. And so the energy is going to flow. I think it would be interesting to take a look at the specific dates and times of when people have vanished, and correspondingly look at what did the sun do within the past 24 hours. It doesn't have to put out a big burst right now and suddenly a person vanishes. It puts out energy, the earth capacitor charges and charges, and then the energy is released. And when it's released in very predictable ways. And I think it'd be very interesting to see what what kind of correlation you can make from that. Because there are places where the energy comes out of the earth a lot more easily than other places. Around mountains, which are now, of course, national parks. So I think there's something to this. I just don't know what it is.
Yeah, it's fascinating. And then one thing I want to ask you before we go is like about a little bit about your healing. Like, what was one of the most like interesting, or like, what would you say one of the most like uh, uh, impossible healings you've ever done? Like, have you done a lot that seemed to be like impossible, but you've been able to like heal?
Well, I never film them. Fox
Yeah.
TV did a story. You probably find that one interesting. You can link to it if you want to. Just go on YouTube, look for Fox TV Jerry Wills. You'll find it. There's this guy. Name was Kelly Osaka, and he was married. He was a church kind of guy. He was walking home from work, went across the park with a friend of his, And these people showed up that didn't like him. Well, Kelly is from Tonga. He's a mountain of a man, and these other people were also from Tonga. They beat him up. They beat his face with a shovel. They kicked him in the face with steel-toed boots and basically tried to kill him. He didn't die. They got him to the hospital, but he had brain bleeds and collapsed an eye, broken eye socket. It was just awful. There was at the time, we'll call him a patron, that whenever they heard someone had had something seriously damaging like this, someone needed help, basically, I'd get a phone call. I never knew who they were. You know, I just got a phone call. Go to this address. The money's been deposited. So I'd write down the address, and I'd just, whatever I was doing, I'd stop, get in the car, and go. Well, this happened with Kelly. I ended up at the hospital. A fellow named Tony Arnold was with me, and he happened to be at my store when the call came in. Anyway, I don't know what to expect. I don't like going to hospitals anyway, but I go to the hospital, and here's this very large guy with tubes in his head, you know, IVs in his hands, bandages all over the damn place. He looks bad. Well, I didn't know that the doctors, because I met his wife, Tony stayed with his wife. I didn't know that the doctors had just told her they don't expect him to live through the night. You know, there was too much damage, too much brain bleeding and all this. I didn't know that. So I go on in there. I'm not going to touch this guy. And I just do what I do. And so I did that for him. And I could see. I saw, you know, what was going on. I fixed this, I fixed that. And, oh, they had a tube down his neck for breathing. Anyway, I did the things I do. I finish. I go out of the room. And I tell his wife, he's going to be all right. He's going to have a hell of a headache in the morning, though. And she's like, really? Oh my God. You know, thank God. Tony's just looking at me like I've lost my damn mind. And I said, okay, that's all I can do. Let me know how he's doing. Gave her my phone number. And I left. Next day, I got a call. He woke up. There's no more bleeding in the brain. You know, a lot of the issues that he had were just gone. And a few days later, he's even better. He's breathing on his own. We're going to discharge him from the hospital. Well, I figured that's how it should have turned out. So Fox News got a hold of this. For 11 years, they did 2 stories a year about me. And so this was one of them. And you can see the rest of the story just by looking it up on YouTube. It's there.
Wow. Yeah, I'll definitely put the link to it. Man, you've had a fascinating life. I'd love to have you back for a part 2, Jerry, because I have a lot more questions I want to ask you. But like, yeah, would you be up for that? Like, this was amazing. You know?
Oh, sure. Yeah, thank you for inviting me back. It's very kind of you.
Yeah, and you want to tell people where they can find you and stuff like that, and how they can get your services and stuff like that?
Well, there are 2 different websites. The healing website is jerrywills.com. So it's Jerry with a J and WILLS.com. That's the healing site. The other site is the other facet of my life. It's called jerrywillsshow.com. I do shows like you do, Robert, and have interesting interviews and so forth, so they can go there and check it out if they want to. It is a membership site, so you can take a look if you're interested, folks.
That's awesome, and I'll put the links in the description. Yeah, well, this was amazing. Thank you so much for coming on, Jerry. I loved it. This was great, and I look forward to talking to you again in the future.
Absolutely. It's very kind of you to have me on. Thank you, Robert. I appreciate it.
All right, thank you so much, and have a good night, everybody. When this comes out, have a good night, Jerry.